Good morning and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another breakdown and analysis of the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, we are back once again, breaking this down verse by verse, making those verses up into logical, factual statements, so we can understand what is Allah up to, what is this madness, what is he expressly telling his Muslims to do, and how does that affect us as non-believers in the Western world today in our lives. So, as you'll remember last time, we finished going through the history of Adam, Eve, Abraham, Moses. Even Jesus got a mention, but Allah took the credit for all of these things. Then we finished off on the punishments that the evil Jews and Christians are going to get by the Muslims in Allah's orders. Despite the fact that the evil Jews and Christians are actually mind controlled by Allah, so they're only doing what they're doing because Allah is guiding them to do it. But he's also guiding his Muslims to kill those guys because they're evil, so he's guiding everyone together to have a big war to kill each other and die in sin and evil. That is expressly in the book. So now that we've got that out of the way, I wanted to attack Sharia, which is Islamic law. So after having read this, I can tell you, this is my opinion, by the way, this isn't in there. In my opinion, Sharia is expressly written to guide small groups of Muslims as an incursion, as an invading force in another country. And as we know, Allah in his Quran of the Muslims actually expressly tells his Muslims, go into all the other countries of the world, the seven firmaments, kill the men, enslave and capture the women and children, force them all to drop their culture and forget about it, and only worship Allah and do Quran stuff at the threat of death by beheading. So with that in mind, let's have a look at some of those laws that he tells his Muslims to install in the countries that they invade and how they actually work. So, first of all, he starts with a bit of a summary. So he says, your nations are not righteous of their law and lives, for only Allah, his angels and his messengers, his Quran and his genocidal end times prophecy are righteous. Only the laws from Allah are meaningful. Care only for other Muslims, for prayer and mosque charity, and to keep up your avowed promise to Allah, and above all fear only Allah. Such are the people of truth, righteous in pain, panic, suffering, and in waiting. So, breaking that down, it's quite a simple start to the Sharia, and the reason he's saying this, I feel, is because Allah is always setting up his, he likes to set up what he's about to say, so he encourages his Muslims to do what he's telling them with a previous setup, and that is the reason why he's saying your nations are not righteous of their law and lives. He's basically saying the nations that you're going to go into, O Muslims, they have no value. They're not righteous, they're bad. The nations are bad, the laws are bad, the lives of the people are bad. So when I tell you in a minute to go in and murder them all, that's going to be absolutely fine. Don't feel bad about it. That's what he's saying here. Your nations are not righteous of their law and lives. Only Allah, his messengers, angels, and his Quran and his genocidal end times prophecy are righteous. That's explicitly what he says. Then he finishes up the verse by saying, such are the peoples of truth, righteous in pain, panic, suffering, or in waiting. So he knows, Allah actually knows what he's about to get his Muslims to do, because he's setting them up by saying, even in pain or panic, even in suffering, even in waiting, which I guess means if you get locked up for committing crimes, even in all those scenarios, you still have to be righteous to Allah's commands if you are the people of truth. So what he's effectively saying here is, Muslims, I'm about to give you a bunch more commands. If you don't do them, even when you're in pain, even when you're panicking, even when you're suffering, and even when you're in jail, you still have to do these, otherwise you are not going to reach the end times, and you will be just like those evil Jews and Christians I'm about to order you to go and kill. That's what this means. O ye believers, the law of equity is prescribed in cases of murder. How did I know his first law was going to be about murdering? O ye believers, the law of equity is prescribed in cases of murder. A man for a man, a slave for a slave, a concubine for a concubine, and also for the brother of ye who is slain, is to be fairly compensated at a once-off tariff. After this Allah will frown upon further demand. So, what is he trying to tell us here, I wonder? Well, O ye believers, so again he's telling his invading force, if you believe in the Quran you will do this. That's why he starts, O ye believers. It's not just to anyone, it's to his invasion force in another country. So he knows Allah knows while he's commanding this that this is against the laws of the country he's just invaded with his Muslims. He knows that. And he starts off with the law of equity. Now, what is equity? Equity means value. So money or ownership of something, you know, valuable resource. That is what equity means. So the law of equity prescribed in cases of murder means how do we deal with valuable stuff, money and goods and property and slaves in a case of murder. He goes on to say, a man for a man, a slave for a slave, and a concubine for a concubine. So what Allah is doing here is he's describing you the order of value he gives to people. Men first, then slaves, then concubines, which by the way is women, because wives aren't mentioned in here. So in cases of murder, the law of value, this is how Allah prescribes value to people. In the case of murder, a man is the most valuable person. So if a man gets murdered, there's a bigger punishment. Then a slave is the middle tier. If a slave gets killed, there's a middle punishment. And then a concubine being murdered is virtually worthless. Like, we don't really care about that. That's the least one. So I think what that means is, in cases of murder, the law of equity means if someone tries to murder you, you murder him. A man for a man is if someone tries to murder you, you murder them. If someone murders one of your people, you murder one of their people. And a slave for a slave means if you murder one of their slaves, it's pretty much okay. As long as you can, or if they murder one of your slaves, it's pretty much okay. As long as you can take one of their people as a slave. That's what the law of equity prescribes. And then concubines are like the lowest form of life here. I mean, they're getting pretty unfairly treated. But then it goes on and says, for the brother of ye who is slain is to be fairly compensated at a once-off tariff. After this, Allah will frown upon further demand. So why is he adding these conditions to his law? You would have thought murder is pretty cut and dried, but not here. The law of equity prescribed in cases of murder is actually saying murder is only murder if those guys commit it against you, O Muslims. When you're killing them, as I've described, that doesn't count as murder. So murder is only Muslims killing other Muslims. That's what this is describing. So the law of equity is if a Muslim murders another Muslim, it's a man for a man, he shall be killed. But if you murder someone's slave, you just have to give them one of your slaves, it's fine. And if you murder a concubine, you just need to give them one of your concubines. That's what this means. And for the brother of he who is slain, that means if you kill someone and then they kill your brother, you have to pay them money. A once-off tariff, the fair compensation for a once-off tariff means if that happens to you, if you kill someone and they kill your brother, that's the end of it. You're not allowed to go and kill them anymore. You have to pay them to end the dispute. And it's a once-off payment. After this, Allah will frown upon further demand. So Allah is literally saying, even though our law is to go and kill all these guys and never let them get one over us, if they steal from us, we have to kill them. If they kill one of us, we have to kill them. We never let anything go with them. There's no, there's always revenge with them and no forgiveness. When it comes to his Muslims, you can only kill one person. And if they kill your brother, that's it. You're literally not allowed to go past that. And then you have to pay them to end the dispute. So Allah is saying to his Muslims here, your lives are worth something and those people are not worth anything. And the proof of that is the law of equity prescribes if you kill another man, you can only have one, you can only revenge that one time, and even that's frowned upon. After that, you just pay to end the dispute. And the reason he's saying that is to make sure his small invading force of Muslims don't get too small. Don't start attacking each other. Remember, the Quran is the reason you're there. And dominating the culture, killing all the men, getting all the women and children, and making them all force converts to Quran, that is your point. So that's why we're going through this law. He goes on. Your life has a value equitable by the law, and you must restrain yourselves in fear of Allah. In death, your possessions have a value equitable by law. Your father will inherit before your sons. If you be God-fearing, this is reasonable. So, I feel like this is quite telling as well. Allah knows while he's sending his Muslims into these other countries, a lot of them are going to get killed. And there is going to be a lot of arguing about who gets their stuff, because they're an invading force. They don't have a lot of money. They're poor. They're an invading force there to cause war, so they're not going to have any friends. What happens to the value of the stuff they plundered really matters. That's why this law is literally number 2. The first law is what happens when you murder each other. The second law is what goes, who gets your stuff and your money if you get murdered. So that's what this is saying. Your life has a value equitable by law. So once you die, the stuff that you own still has value. It's not like you can just take someone's stuff if you kill them. That's what Allah is saying here. Your life has a value equitable by the law, and you must restrain yourselves in fear of Allah. So they're literally saying, if a Muslim gets killed, restrain yourselves. Don't just take all his stuff and claim it as your own. That's not how it works. That's how it works with these guys. You keep what you kill with these guys because they're, worthless and valueless, and we're here to kill them anyway. When it comes to other Muslims, if another Muslim dies, restrain yourselves in fear of Allah, because the stuff that is left by that guy has intrinsic equitable value. And that means the mosque own it. If you be God-fearing, this is reasonable. So he's even saying there, if you don't like this and you think it's unreasonable, you don't fear Allah. And that means you've sinned and the other Muslims will kill you. So you can't argue with this. If this happens, the mosque takes over. You don't get any say in it. That's that. Then he goes on. Allah will charge you if you're guilt, if you are forced to have corrupted the will of the slain after the feat. So it's very poorly written, this, I've got to say. But I think, if I'm correct, what he's trying to say here is Allah will charge you with guilt, O Muslims, if after someone dies you try and corrupt the flow of their stuff going back to the mosque. If you try and take some of that stuff before it reaches the mosque, say you and your best friend are out there killing the infidels and the Christians and the Jews, and your friend dies and drops all his stuff on the ground, you're not allowed to keep any of it. You're not allowed to keep a trinket for yourself or take some of that money. You have to hand it all into the mosque, and if you don't, Allah will charge you with guilt because you would have corrupted the will of the slain after the fact. That's what this means. And then he rounds out the verse by saying, Allah will see all you do, for Allah sees and hears all. So this again is saying, even though you're out there, you're literally in a war killing the non-believers and they're dropping their stuff on the floor when they die, even though you have to pick up their stuff and carry it back to the mosque, Allah's watching you. Don't be pocketing a few of those coins. Don't be stealing that weapon for yourself. Don't take any of his stuff at all. All of it has to go back to the mosque, or Allah will see and hear all you do, and you'll be in guilt. And that means off with your head, you're dead. In the words of Allah. And then we move on to the last kind of description of the details of this law. Those who fear favoritism must accept this and be without complaint nor accusation, for Allah is fair and oft forgiving. So he's put in the cap on the details of this law by saying, if you fear favoritism, so if you think that the church or the mosque, are, they're favoriting someone over you and they're being unfair in the dispersal of equitable goods, you must accept their decision without complaint or accusation, for Allah is fair and oft forgiving. So what that means is, Allah is fair, and what he's saying to you is you can't complain, you can't make accusations, even if it's clearly something corrupt going on there and you're being ripped off by the mosque. You have to just accept it and say that it's fair. Not only that, by saying Allah is oft forgiving, Allah is even admitting here that sometimes the mosque are going to be using favoritism. They are going to be ripping you off despite the fact that your brother just died. But you can't complain. You have to just say it's fair and accept it and worship more. That's what this is saying. So that's the end of our reading of the first Sharia law, the law of equity prescribed in cases of murder. But let's go through it in more detail, just so we know exactly what we're doing before we move on to the next bit. So, O ye believers, we start by saying the law of equity is prescribed in cases of murder, and then it goes through the descriptions of value of people. So a man is the top value person, a slave is the middle value person, and then a woman, a concubine, is the bottom value person. And if you kill someone who's a Muslim, and he takes revenge by killing your brother, you have to pay him to end that dispute. So neither one of you has actually committed a crime of sin there. Allah will forgive you both as long as you give him money. And obviously, while you're giving him money, you have to also give the mosque money, because they're arbitrating this, and that's called zakat. You give your charity to the mosque. So what this boils it down to is human life is worth money to Allah, and Allah wants that money. That's literally what this is saying. Then he says, your life has a value equitable by the law, and you must restrain yourself in fear of Allah. So if you spot another dead Muslim, O ye believers, even though you have to pick up all his stuff and his gold and his weapon and take it back to the mosque, don't be keeping any of that stuff now. None of it's yours, not a single coin or effect or a locket that you're keeping for, remembrance of your friend. None of that stuff belongs to you. In the words of Allah, it immediately has to go back to Allah, and that means you give it to the mosque. And if you don't, you should be God-fearing that this is reasonable. What that means is it is reasonable unless you're disagreeing with God, in which case, off with the head, you're dead, in the words of Allah. Then he says, in death, your possessions have a value equitable by law. Your father will inherit before the sons. Now, let's go into the detail of that. Why would that matter? Why would Allah say, if you die, your father will inherit before your sons? I wonder. Well, if you think about it, especially in oldie times, dark ages Islamic culture, your father might not be alive very long. So the probability is your father's either dead because he's been a soldier and he's been killed, or if he's not dead, the probability is he is a mullah, an imam. He's working for the mosque. So he's not going out fighting battles, he's preaching. So what that means is, when you die, O ye believer, your stuff goes to the mosque. If you have surviving sons and they're now in poverty because they don't have a father anymore, they now are owned by the mosque because they have to go to the mosque for food and zakat charity. They're not allowed any of the stuff you plundered, despite the fact that you're dead and they're now penniless and fatherless. No, Allah expressly permits the mosque to take all that valuable, the equitable stuff away from your sons, unless you have a father, and then it goes to your father. But not the sons. The sons don't get anything. And that is expressly described here. And it even says, if ye be God-fearing, this is reasonable. So don't argue with it unless you're saying God is unreasonable. And if you're saying God is reasonable, Allah will charge you with your guilt, which is even more unreasonable. So in conclusion, we can see the first law of Sharia is about murder. But whereas in the Torah, the first law is thou shalt never murder, Sharia is the opposite. Sharia expects that you're going to be murdering because you've already been told by Allah who and when you're going to go and do this murdering, why you're going to murder them, and what's going to happen to them after you murder. Now we're talking about their stuff. When you murder someone, all Allah is interested in is the value of equity in law of their possessions. That is what this law is. So one Sharia, law one of Sharia is, when you kill someone, the mosque owns all their stuff. Even if you've got sons and you die, your stuff is owned by the mosque. If you kill someone, then you have to pay if it's another Muslim, but it doesn't count as murder if it's anyone else except for Muslims. And the last thing is, those who fear favoritism from the mosque must accept their decisions without complaint or accusation and say that it's fair. So all of this stuff happening, all that money dripping back towards the mosque, you're not getting it, your son's not getting it, the people around you aren't getting it, your wife certainly isn't getting it, your concubines aren't getting it. The mosque is getting it all, and if you don't like it, you are saying that God is not fair. Allah will charge you with your guilt, and you will off the head, you're dead. You will die. That is expressly what this means. So that's the end of this video. We're going to go through the rest of Sharia very slowly and carefully because it's very snakily written. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But as we can see here, and we know from the last episode where we went through the many lies of Allah and how deceitful he is and how he doesn't keep to his promises, Law 1 of Sharia gives virtually unlimited power to the mosque. Although it keeps saying Allah this, Allah's going to, be fearing of Allah. Nobody is going to be fearing of Allah because Allah is the mosque at the moment. The mosque are the ones that arbitrate Allah's will on the Muslims. And all the money's going back to them. So this is expressly to enrich and grow the mosque, which the people are just like little ants for. And this is all happening in a foreign country where their laws are being ignored and they are actually being killed and stolen from. So this is an invasion plan law to make the mosque in the foreign country bigger and stronger and richer and more powerful at the expense of its own Muslims and their sons even. And as an afterthought, it is to tell Muslims, if you don't like this, or if you don't like the way that the mosque are treating you, fucking don't think about it. No rebellion, no doubt. Otherwise, off with your head, you're dead. And that is in the Quran of the Muslims in Allah's own words. So that's the end of this video, ladies, gents and Pikachus. Hope you learned something and you look forward to later on when we go through the next Sharia bit, which is going to be Ramadan and fasting. That should be fun. So until then, God bless, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. Why am I not surprised? Sharia law number 1 is what happens to the stuff of murdered people. So anyway, next time we'll be looking at Ramadan, so I'll see you then. Until then, God bless, goodbye, and I'll see you in the next one.